Here is the massive earthquake and tsunami that shook Russia's eastern coast. On July 30th at 11:25 a.m. local time, an 8.8 magnitude earthquake struck near Russia's Kamchatka peninsula. This was one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded. The disaster prompted the Kremlin and Putin to declare the highest alert level. An emergency was immediately declared. This was far more than a natural disaster or a civil crisis for Russia, because the epicenter of the earthquake was just a few kilometers away from Russia's Villuchinsk nuclear submarine base. This is Russia's most important nuclear gateway to the Pacific Ocean. This is because Borei and Delta-IV class submarines lie silently waiting in the depths, ready to fire intercontinental missiles at a single command. But now the Villuchinsk nuclear submarine base is completely shrouded in darkness. This is because the facility is very old and highly susceptible to damage, and Putin had already ordered the ships at the military base to leave. So could this corner Russia's overseas nuclear deterrent in one fell swoop? According to the Russian Geophysical Research Institute, this massive earthquake occurred approximately 149 kilometers southeast of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, at a depth of only 19.3 kilometers. An earthquake of magnitude 8.8 at such a shallow depth maximized the intensity felt on the Earth's surface. It was recorded as the worst disaster to hit the Kamchatka Peninsula since 1952. After only a few seconds of shaking, nature once again demonstrated its power. Giant waves broke away from the Pacific Ocean and hit the coast with tsunamis exceeding 4 meters. The port city of Severokurilsk was almost completely submerged. Power outages spread like wildfire, communication lines went dead, and roads were filled with mud and debris. Fishing boats were swept ashore, and civilian ports turned into ruins. What made this chaotic scene even more threatening was the proximity of the earthquake's epicenter to one of Russia's most critical military sites in the Far East. The Rybatchi submarine base was only 130 kilometers away. It houses the Borei and modernized Delta-IV class submarines, the most sensitive assets of the Russian Pacific Fleet. Each submarine can theoretically carry dozens of nuclear warheads with intercontinental range, which is why they are referred to in military literature as a strategic second strike insurance. The distance from the epicenter of the earthquake to Rybatchi is roughly 3 minutes by jet and 15 minutes by tsunami wave. This does not merely mean the pier is shaking. Even the slightest subsidence along the coastal slope is sufficient to disrupt the alignment of the skids that secure the submarines to their berths. If the skid tilts sideways or under pressure, it becomes impossible to safely lower the 16,000-ton Borei hull into the water. Even if the steel giant makes it into the water, micro damage that disrupts its hydrodynamic sound profile prevents it from remaining silent. Without stealth, the deterrent is lost. This is why it is believed that the Russian Navy was forced to take to the ocean with unusual activity in the hours following the earthquake. According to reports, at least 2 Borei vessels left the port on an emergency sortie. Thus, while the technical condition of the base remains unclear, the unsinkable part of the fleet will remain safe underwater. However, even if the submarines leave the port, the problem is not over. A ballistic missile submarine carries not only warheads, but also liquid fuel, oxidizers, high-pressure hydraulic lines, and a nuclear reactor. Under normal conditions, the maintenance lines at Rybatchi replenish fuel and warheads after each mission. If cracks in the coastal infrastructure have damaged the water tightness of the protected tunnels where Bulava-30 missiles are stored, the reloading program could be delayed for months. What this means for Moscow: submarines in the Pacific will not be able to replace every missile they fire, and active strike capabilities will gradually diminish over time. Can the Russian Navy deploy new submarines with full launch capabilities to the Far East? In theory, yes, but in practice, the Northern Sea route stretching from St. Petersburg to Kamchatka strains logistical capacity. That route requires icebreakers, escort ships, and a diesel fuel supply chain. Maintaining such continuity on this scale is not easy, as the economy contracts under sanctions. There is a more fragile issue on the defense industry front. How much shock can the fuel blocks of stored Bulava missiles tolerate? In solid fuel missiles, even micro-cracks between composite fuel rods inside the body can disrupt torque balance during ignition. Russian manufacturer MIT acknowledges that if a fuel separation trace forms, the missile's accuracy drops exponentially. Recasting is carried out at facilities near Moscow. There is no such capacity on the Pacific coast. Therefore, the reliability of the stored long-range rockets is as critical as the physical destruction caused by the earthquake. The Kremlin does not want to take risks. Even the slightest suspicion leads to separation of the warhead and rocket, increasing refunctioning costs and reducing operational stock. Another factor is the radar network. The Tobol M coastal early warning radar replaced the Soviet-made Varsanov in the region years ago. The architecture of the day did not require a tsunami sensor interface. Cold War plans measured natural phenomena, not enemy missiles. As a result, the seismic anchoring plates installed beneath the radar building remained at standard military building reinforcement levels. The recent earthquake tested these limits. Contact between sensor cables and salt water or settlement of the foundation steel could shift the radar's linear rotation by milliseconds. Azimuth deviation delays the early warning system, and if one ear in the Pacific hears a second later, the ballistic missile warning chain is affected like dominoes. So is such a crisis really happening? Of course, we need to listen to the facts here. There are numerous amateur videos and images circulating online revealing what is happening. And the Kremlin is declaring a state of emergency in the region. It has been confirmed that tsunami waves exceeding 4 meters have hit the Kuril Islands and the coast of Kamchatka. We have seen many times in past earthquakes that waves of this height can destroy military docks, fuel tankers, radar towers, and ammunition depots. Moreover, the military base in Villuchinsk is located in a narrow enclosed geography like Avacha Bay, which traps wave energy. This means that the impact of tsunami waves here could be much more destructive than in the open sea. Despite all this, not a single image, statement, or confirmation has come from the Rybachi submarine base. Neither the Kremlin nor the Russian Defense Ministry is speaking out. The Navy is also silent. And it is precisely this silence that is sounding alarm bells. Because Russia does not want to give even the slightest signal of vulnerability regarding its strategic deterrence. Any damage or malfunction related to nuclear capabilities would have not only military but also diplomatic and psychological consequences. That is why Moscow keeps the curtain tightly closed in such cases. Think about it. If the submarines were in port, the tsunami could have caused cracks in the docks, meaning the ships could be physically stranded. Launch systems could be out of alignment, and nuclear maintenance areas could be underwater. If the ships are at sea, their return routes are now at risk. Because apart from deep water ports like Villuchinsk, Russia has no other Pacific port capable of accommodating these submarines. Civilian ports cannot accept these ships due to inadequate infrastructure. Dock connections, nuclear safety shields, command and control networks. None of these can be backed up. And more importantly, if submarines remain at sea for days or weeks, their operational effectiveness will plummet due to limited food supplies, lack of physical maintenance, and constant sonar threats. The uncertainty created by the earthquake is not only a matter of Russia's internal security. The US Pacific Fleet's command center in Hawaii, the Japanese self-defense forces, and bases in Australia's Northern Territory raised their alert levels within hours. The reason is not only the tsunami, it is the possibility of nuclear warhead movement in the wake of a natural disaster. The uncontrolled drift of a ballistic missile submarine, the interruption of communications, or the inability to verify the status of the reactor would upset regional deterrence calculations. Washington waits in readiness because the possibility of accidental tensions in the nuclear triad is identified as a serious risk in strategy books. Moscow, on the other hand, is forced to give the impression of emergency exercises because it has sent its ships out without justification. This keeps the rival sensor network on alert. Crisis communication kicks in, and both sides spend more resources to maintain the balance. The shadow of the war in Ukraine also looms over the geopolitical picture. From Kiev's perspective, the fragility of Russian deterrence in the Pacific means that Western capitals will have to recalibrate their assessment of the Kremlin threat. Russia, whose submarine presence in the Black Sea is already limited, would appear to have suffered a second blow in the Pacific, weakening NATO's eastern flank. This translates into moral and diplomatic capital. For example, plans to deploy Patriot batteries in Poland could accelerate. Technical cooperation between Japan and Ukraine could be put on the agenda, and even the argument of a global Russian risk could gain strength in Sweden's NATO membership process. The natural disaster thus becomes a political multiplier. Moscow is grappling with a different agenda at home. Although official channels sent messages that the submarines are safe to calm the public after the earthquake, local telegram groups reported that the families of base personnel had been instructed to evacuate their homes. These claims have not been independently verified, but images of ticketless evacuations, fuel queues, and videos of backup generator shipments point to a single reality. The Villuchinsk area is unprepared for a prolonged outage. There is nowhere else to go, no other way out. If the civilian infrastructure collapses, the army's morale will quickly decline. Putin's long-standing Far East development project rhetoric is losing its credibility amid the visible destruction. The most critical debate is taking shape in the following lines. Can a natural disaster silence Russia's nuclear trump card? In the short term, actual annihilation does not seem likely. If the submarines have set sail, the second strike capability remains on paper. However, in the medium term, if the base infrastructure cannot return to full capacity, the deterrent effect will diminish as the number of missiles ready for launch decreases. Nuclear strategy is based not only on the number of warheads, but also on reliable delivery capabilities. If the other side starts to think, you can't fire them because you can't launch them, deterrence melts away. The Putin administration is aware of this. That is why there are frequent reports in the Russian press about repair contracts. Aircraft maintenance personnel from Voronezh, underwater resource teams from Novosibirsk, and radar technicians from Kaliningrad are being sent to the Pacific. The problems include long routes, equipment shortages, and difficulties in obtaining spare parts due to sanctions. If the tsunami also hit fuel storage lines near the coast, there is also a risk of radioactive contamination. The nitrocellulose-based rocket fuel used in ballistic missiles reacts with salt water to produce nitrogen oxide gas. This gas accumulates in enclosed hangars, creating an explosive atmosphere. Military officials are currently trying to convert the warehouses to a negative pressure system and filter the air flowing in. The climate is harsh. Volcanic ash can even fall outside, and time is short. An incorrectly implemented ventilation opening could reduce a facility that was not destroyed by the earthquake to ashes. This possibility is increasing the pressure on engineers working in the region. In recent years, Moscow's rhetoric has frequently emphasized partial base modernization. However, defense spending has diverted funds from Pacific projects to fuel the ground war in Ukraine. The earthquake has brought forward the bill for delayed investments. Now, the Kremlin faces two options. Allocate billions of dollars to base rehabilitation and reinforce the submarine fleet, or shift capacity to back up ports like Vladivostok and Alenia earlier than planned. The second option means logistical and secrecy gaps, while the first means grappling with import bans on key components due to Western sanctions. Whichever option is chosen, the Russian defense industry will face a new cost crater. Another loser in this complex scenario is Russia's early warning chain. Until the tsunami sensor-equipped Tobel-M radar is repaired, ballistic missile tracking duties in the Pacific have been shifted to the Voronezh DM radar in Orenburg. As distance increases, interference grows, error margins widen, and response times lengthen. NATO naval patrols pick up this signal, and electronic intelligence reports are updated with blind spot analyses. As the military balance teeters on such micro-fissures, the geopolitical ground beneath Moscow is shifting in a very real sense. The question is whether this crack will widen. The coming months are therefore critical. Will new construction cranes rise in Avacha Bay? How many tons of steel will be shipped from distant lands to begin ramp repairs? When the ships carrying these materials are caught in the sanctions list, will the engineers of the Russian Pacific Fleet be able to find other creative solutions? Every delay adds a new question mark to Moscow's narrative of a second strike. And every question mark erodes Putin's diplomatic bargaining power by a few millimeters. The earthquake zone is cold, aftershocks continue in the foggy bays, but the Kremlin is feeling the coldest right now. Nature has shaken Russia's nuclear shield without firing a single shot or imposing a single sanction. Moreover, this risk has not been averted. The geology of the Pacific Firebelt guarantees new shocks. Putin's Pacific deterrence must now live in the shadow of this reality. More importantly, Other capitals are now calculating how much distance they can maintain in that shadow. Today, it is not just the rocks shaking in Kamchatka. The strategic equation is also cracking. We will continue to monitor developments. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think during this critical period? We look forward to meeting you again with new developments. Thank you for watching.